morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Peace Week Spring 2025, organized by the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. Each semester, Carter School Peace Week brings together faculty, students, and alumni, as well as friends and partners from across the peace and conflict resolution community, for a week-long conversation around how to effectively address urgent issues of peace and justice. Our theme for our Spring 2025 Peace Week is conflict resolution in a changing and uncertain world. This Carter School Peace Week session is titled COP29, From Resolutions to Action, Operationalizing Climate Relief and Recovery. In this session, we explore the critical challenge of moving from high-level climate and peace-building commitments to meaningful, grounded action, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected countries. Since COP27, we've seen growing momentum around the intersection of climate, peace, and security, especially through the Climate Responses for Sustaining Peace initiative, followed by COP28's Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery, and Peace. This has helped place climate-related security risks more firmly on the global agenda, building pathways for more coherent and conflict-sensitive responses to the climate crisis. Yet, as climate shocks continue to exacerbate humanitarian and security risks, the question is no longer if we must act, but how we do so effectively, inclusively, and collaboratively. We are privileged today to be joined by an extraordinary group of experts who bring insight, experience, and urgency to this conversation.
Yes, well, thank you, Angie. As we move between COP28 declarations, COP29 Baku Call, and look ahead to COP30, which is going to take place in Belém, Brazil, this session is an opportunity to surface the operational, ethical, and political questions that underpin the climate security agenda. Our four speakers each represent a key dimension of this complex puzzle: data and peace building, child-centered adaptation, climate diplomacy, and finance and food security in fragile contexts. We will begin by exploring how we operationalize the commitments already made, and we will close by inviting each one of them, so they desire, to share what they hope COP30 will deliver in this space. Let me start with the introduction to the speakers. We're honored to be joined by an outstanding panel of experts representing a wide range of disciplines. Let me just start with, first, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Jeff Helsing, the Executive Director of the Better Evidence Project at the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. Jeff brings extensive expertise in data, conflict analytics, and evidence-based policy in peace-building contexts. His work focuses on translating research into actionable strategies that support practitioners and policymakers working to prevent and resolve conflict. Next, joining us from the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, is Julius Jackson, who leads the Conflict and Peace Unit within the Office of Emergencies and Resilience. Julius is a seasoned expert in food security, agricultural resilience, and programming that is sensitive to both climate and conflict. His work in the humanitarian development peace nexus places him at the forefront of integrated approaches to crisis response. We're also honored to have Michiko Fukase from UNICEF. Michiko specializes in peace building with a strong focus on mental health and psychosocial support, MHPSS, youth engagement, and environmental peace building. Her work cut across several global policy agendas, including women, peace and security, and youth, peace and security. Representing the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have Hans Olav Ibrek, who serves as the Policy Director for Energy and Climate Change and a Special Envoy for Climate and Security. Hans Olav is a key figure in international climate diplomacy, working at the intersection for energy transitions, peace and security, and global climate finance. Today, this is moderated by Angie, Said, and myself, Diego Osorio. Angie, if you allow me, I want to introduce you, is a PhD candidate at the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution. Her expertise lies in peace building, conflict resolution, and the political economy of fragility. She brings a critical perspective on the governance dimensions of climate and development, institutional structures, and peace process. And myself, if you allow me, is I am a PhD candidate as well, also a government official, and I'm doing my PhD at Utrecht University, and I'm an adjunct professor at Bishops, ENAP, and other institutions in Canada. And I also co-chair the education working group of the Environmental Peace Building Association. I work in the intersection between climate security and policy expertise, and I try to bridge education, environmental peace building, and multilateral negotiations. Over to you, Angie.
Thank you, Diego. Before we begin our panel discussion, let's briefly set the stage with key developments that are central to today's session. COP27 Climate Responses for Sustainable Peace Initiative, COP28 Declaration, and Baku Call. At COP27, the Climate Responses for Sustaining Peace initiative was launched to ensure climate action supports sustainable peace and development through nationally owned context-specific approaches. Aligned with the UN's 2030 Agenda, the African Union's Agenda 2063, and Africa's peace and climate strategies, the CRISP initiative links climate adaptation and peace building, promoting climate resilience food systems, addressing climate-related displacement, and boosting climate finance for peace. This initiative seeks to implement activities that build synergies across sectors, close knowledge gaps, accelerate tailored finance, and strengthen capacities at different levels. At COP28, a year later, a declaration was adopted on climate relief, recovery, and peace, recognizing formally the critical links between climate change, conflict, and fragility. It emphasized the need for climate actions that are not only technically effective, but also peace-sensitive. The declaration called on states, donors, and international organizations to better coordinate climate finance, humanitarian aid, and peace building, especially in vulnerable and conflict-affected settings. In essence, it was a political commitment to breaking down silos and aligning climate and peace efforts.
Yes, and following this, we had the Baku Call, or the COP29, and it was basically a presidential initiative. Building on that momentum, the COP29 presidency launched the Baku Call for Climate Action for Peace, Relief, and Recovery. This initiative pushes the conversation from coordination to implementation. It established the Baku Climate and Peace Action Hub, a platform to foster collaboration, scale up inclusive and locally led interventions, and ensure that climate adaptation and relief work are responsive to the realities of fragile countries. It signals a shift from talking about links between climate and peace to building systems and partnerships that act on them. Today, our goal is to explore what these declarations mean in practice, what it takes to move from resolution to action, and what we collectively expect and demand, wishfully, from COP30 as the next step. Let's just move from the first round. Over to you, Angie.
Thank you. Jeff, starting with you, and in relation to the work you're doing through the Better Evidence Project at the Carter School, what role does data play in designing effective peace-building strategies in climate-affected conflict zones? And which data types or sources have proven most useful in fragile contexts?
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to speak to this a little bit in terms of some of the way in which data has been, our data management and the use of new technology has had an impact on the peace building and conflict resolution field. So I just wanted to mention a few things, the way in which those organizations, both local and global, have been able to make use of changes in data. The first is in the gathering and synthesizing of information. There's a lot of controversy about artificial intelligence, but one way that AI has been particularly beneficial is in the synthesis of increasing amounts of data, in part because a lot of data, and this relates to climate data, as well as probably more importantly, the impact that climate change has on local communities. So being able to, in a sense, get data or information or observations that can be collected and collated is a strong contribution of the technology. Secondly, the speed of communications. That has greatly increased the ability to engage in crisis management. But we're also seeing, and this is related to both of the previous points, witnessing, that is the observations, the ability of getting real-time information on the ground. This is increasingly being done by a number of different projects. I can think of the Peace Rep initiative at the University of Edinburgh, ACLED, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Network. What they're doing is they're getting witnessing or information from locals on the ground in different communities. And then the next step is collating and curating such material, and then being able to synthesize it, interpret it, and make it available for policymakers, either at the government level, the NGO level, or the international organization level. We also see, again, connected to this, this kind of mapping that becomes particularly important. Monitoring, the ability to monitor and be able to verify that parties are agreeing to conditions that they have agreed to implement as part of international agreements. And then we also have early warning capacity, early warning in terms of both climate issues, agricultural issues, famine issues, loss of water resources, etc. But also, we can also kind of use technology to begin to understand when people's attitudes, their concerns begin to change. We can map hate speech as an example. And then finally, the last thing I'll say is the ability to connect virtually. That allows us to bring data to people, but also to do training to help people in remote areas to enhance their skills and tools to be able to address emerging conflict dynamics. So those are just some of what I think the top line takeaways could be.
Many thanks for this, Jeff. I have a question now for Michiko. Michiko, in the spirit of this evolution, this institutional evolution going from the different engagements for climate security, COP28, 29, maybe also considering the Baku Call, but in general, how can UNICEF promote social cohesion through services like WASH? Water and sanitation, education, and health in communities affected by displacement and climate shocks. What is the core of this action?
So I wanted to give you broader picture about what UNICEF do. So with a presence in over 190 countries, UNICEF is forging partnership at all levels to make climate action inclusive and empowering young people to lead solution for their future. So UNICEF is providing social protection, education, essential social health services. This included, WASH, education, mental health, and psychosocial support to address children and youth-specific challenges to foster resilience and strengthen their peace-building capacities. So we try to design basic services that not only deliver aid, but also rebuild trust and inclusion. So for example, in the Sahel region, the Building Resilience in Sahel program engaged more than 32,000 youth in social cohesion peace initiative, like fostering a sense of community and a shared purpose among displaced and host populations. Or we use conflict-sensitive WASH programs to promote shared water management and reducing tensions over scarce sources and contribute to social cohesion in communities affected by displacement and climate shocks. And we also have initiatives such as Youth Climate Envoy programs, where we train and to lead a local awareness, train the youth in advocacy so they can lead a climate awareness campaign. And also, for example, in Azerbaijan, those young champions with the UNICEF developed the climate resiliency water safety plans tailored for vulnerable communities. And it is one of those examples of commitment to Baku calls to emphasize on age and gender transformative approach to climate related challenges. I think I'm going to give more examples later, but I think I'm a bit mindful of the time. So thank you, Diego.
Thanks to you.
Thank you, Michiko. Now I turn to Hans. And Hans, Norway has always been a leader on the climate and peace agenda. And this regard, I wanted to ask you, how is Norway aligning its foreign policy, energy diplomacy, and climate finance to address both the global energy transition and the peace security dimensions of climate risks?
Thank you very much, Angie. And first of all, also thank you and Diego for organizing this event. My voice is a little bit rusty today because I'm struggling with a really bad cold, but I'm hoping that at least we'll be able to at least convey some messages from my side. Maybe to start off with, to bring in a somewhat different perspective, the topic we are discussing, or the title we're discussing, is from resolutions to actions. And I think we've, as Angie and Diego has already outlined to us, we've made good progress on resolutions, but maybe we've made lesser progress on the action side. In terms of what is the current state of play when it comes to climate, peace and security, I think overall, at least I've worked on this file basically since 2015. And we've made significant progress at COP26. It was in Glasgow. I think it was one event on climate and security. At COP27, we have the CRSP and lots of events, and the same at COP28 and COP29. And then we'll see what's going to happen at COP30. I would just like to flag that maybe I'm a little bit uncertain about Brazil's position on this topic, so we need to discuss this a little bit further, and I will also provide some comments to that effect. At the same time, we've also made considerable progress in terms of working with regional organizations. We have the African Union. The African Union Peace and Security Council has acknowledged climate as a security threat, and the same with IGAD and OSCE, and the same with the Pacific Island Forum. And we now also have a strong mechanism in the UN, the Climate Security Mechanism. A huge setback for us was actually the discussions last year in the UN and the adoption of the Pact of the Future, where the Action 21, which was the climate, peace and security action element, was in essence vetoed by Russia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Brazil. So there are key opposition then from key countries to our agenda, but by and large, the support to the base has actually grown, but it's difficult to work on this file multilaterally when we have key players. I know the US will also join these countries in being opposed to the climate, peace and security agenda. So yes, we made progress, but it's going to be a lot of hard work required from all of us to take this agenda forward. I've been asked some more specific questions about Norway, how we are aligning foreign policy, energy diplomacy, and climate finance. And I've already spoken maybe too long, but just a few words on what our priorities are. Climate change has been a key priority in our development cooperation for many years. We've been supporting extensive mitigation efforts, especially through our reducing emissions from a forest degradation initiative, and also supporting renewable energy and adaptation with a focus on Africa and the least developed countries. Energy, of course, as most of you probably know, Norway is the largest energy provider to Europe, to the rest of Europe. We are part of Europe also, but at least to the EU. So we are critical to Europe's energy security in terms of our oil and gas delivery. And in terms of development cooperation, we are also a large provider of support to renewable energy, especially in Africa. Climate finance, we are one of the largest providers, and we, at least my political leadership, has not yet indicated any interest in trying to cut our budget. On the contrary, so we stay committed to the ODA agenda as such. And of course, we see what's happening all around us, that a lot of countries are now reducing their commitments to ODA. In terms of foreign policy, we developed the climate, peace and security agenda in the lead up to serving on the Security Council in 21 and 22. That's where we also focused a lot on, I'm usually saying it, filling the library, because we needed to get more. Jeff talked about data and the need for data to underpin all our efforts. And for us, it was really important then to get high quality studies that we can start filling the library, because the only way of convincing, even though you can put lots of facts on the table, they might not still be convinced, but at least we can convince some people to join the agenda if we have really good, solid documentation. Finally, I would also like to say that for Norway, as a small country, multilateralism is key to us. And we can only solve the climate problem by working together and by cooperation. And for us, that this is really important as a small country situated way up in the north. We also need to look at climate peace and security and the opportunities it provides for peace building in terms of building trust among parties that are in conflict, and that's an issue where we have not spent enough time yet. I would encourage colleagues on this Zoom event to also start looking into these opportunities. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this. Now I have a question for Julius, as good seeing you again, Julius. How is FAO responding to the compounded challenges of climate change, food insecurity, and fragility in fragile and conflict areas? And what have been the main operational barriers to scaling up climate-smart agriculture in this context? It's one thing that we've been discussing for many years already. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diego and Engie, and indeed the Carter School for this. Well, the first point I'd really like to make on this around climate peace and security is that the two main drivers of food security, or acute food insecurity, are conflict and climate change. The latest figures that are published, the 2024 Global Report on Food Crisis, shows that nearly 282 million people across 59 countries and territories experienced high levels of acute food insecurity, which was an increase of 24 million on the previous year. And the two main drivers in that are conflict and climate change. And we can see going forward, the new Global Report on Food Crises will be coming out in May. And from the Hunger Hotspots review at the end of last year, that trend is just getting worse. And at the same time, food insecurity is a factor in instability, including displacement. And unsustainable food production is a major driver of interconnected climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation. So all of these interlinkages, really one of the key areas, the key role of agri-food systems is around breaking the links between climate change, acute food insecurity, and conflict. And the role of agri-food systems is really central in this. And we've been working on this area for a number of years, both at the policy level, as well as in our programmatic work. At the policy level, the CRSP, pillar number 2, was mentioned earlier, and that was the first CPS related initiative launched at COP. We've briefed the UN Security Council on the topic over the last year as well. We're a member of the Climate Security Mechanism, as mentioned by Hans earlier, and we're very active in these particular fora, trying to move forward not just the climate peace and security, but the climate peace and food security agenda, recognize the really important role that food security plays in this. Programmatically, well, I should also add that actually with the COP28 and 29 presidencies last June, the Rome-based agencies, so that's FAO, the World Food Programme, and the International Fund for Agricultural Development, we convened a high-level meeting in Rome to outline measures to scale up climate action and financing in fragile and conflict-affected contexts in line with the COP28 priority areas. But in terms of programming, we're seeing a shift with, for example, GCF funding into fragile conflict-affected areas. They recently approved a $134 million project in Somalia and Iraq, which FAO will be implementing. And that's about building climate-resistant agricultural systems in areas that are increasingly affected by climate-driven conflict and displacement, but also in terms of work that we've done under the Peace Building Fund, where there's been quite a focus on the thematic of climate peace and security, which is also quite a strong focus on cross-border work as well. So in the case of FAO, that's around how we're addressing issues of pasture deterioration, access to pasture, which is inevitably cross-boundary. In terms of the barriers, I think we've got to look at really the absorptive capacity of government structures and indeed local authorities. And secondly, the question of access in conflict-affected contexts. So those are the two I kind of highlight. So even when we may have funding and technical solutions for climate-smart agriculture, weak administrative systems, staffing shortages, political instability can prevent those from being scaled or even sustained if they've started. And without strong institutional partners, then long-term agricultural climate change adaptation remains a real challenge. Access, where that can be very variable, can sometimes become impossible. It means that shifting front lines, restrictions imposed by armed actors can all limit program delivery. So that necessitates particular skill sets. And in some instances, agencies such as FAO, where we have sometimes a privileged relationship with local communities and have worked with them over many decades, does sometimes facilitate the ability to continue working, but it can also deteriorate very, very quickly, as I'm sure you're all aware from the various protracted crises and their dynamics as they evolve. I would add just, I think, two more quick points. One, less than 2% of climate finance reaches small-scale agriculture, despite its importance for food security and climate resilience. And that came out of a 23 report on climate finance. And I think the second one is just one of the other areas that we are working on is in terms of data visualization, which was mentioned right at the top by Jeff. And that is looking at where we have these overlays between food security, between climate, between conflict data, and not just quantitatively, but also trying to bring in a qualitative aspect to that through local level context analyses. So some of the work we're doing, some of the key barriers that we face in fragile and conflict-affected contexts. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this. Now, let me ask a question to Jeff. How does the Better Evidence Project integrate multi-source data to evaluate outcomes? And what collaborative approaches are used to connect researchers, policymakers, and practitioners in this work?
So thank you. It's been great to hear from all of you who are sort of working on these issues directly and related to policymaking. So I will try to sort of give a sense of what might be possible and what's going on in the peace building field that I think can help strengthen much of what we've heard so far. So at the Better Evidence Project, we're doing two things in collaboration with others. The first is to create a repository of resources in which accessibility to resources and management of thousands and thousands of resources can be much easier, and not only easier, but timely, and provide users or researchers or policymakers quick access to resources, so that they're not spending an inordinate amount of time sort of casting about for things that are relevant to their work. And this is being done through our ability now technologically to do full text searches of data, of resources, so that the timeline has been greatly condensed, and individuals can have access much more easily to what they're looking for. We're not the only ones that are doing this, but what we are doing is one additional kind of component, which is we are developing a network that we are going to create so that we can bring people together, connect them, and promote work that is being done all around the world. So our goal, and we're in the process of doing this now, in creating such a network, is to expand it beyond just peace building organizations or policymakers, but also to connect local organizations, local NGOs, and in a more innovative way. So, for example, the Carter School has a broader collaboration with Rotary districts and Rotary clubs around the world. I just 2.5 weeks ago was in Colombia at the National Conference for Rotarians, over 700 people who were working on different projects in their communities related to climate change issues or agricultural challenge or peace and conflict issues. And they're seeing connections at the local level. The part of the problem they have, even within the Rotary sort of universe, is they're not always aware of what others are doing. So the ability to elevate the profile of projects and work in many different capacities is something we feel can be a great contribution to connecting sort of peace building, project development, and climate change. So we see ourselves as being something of a connective tissue in this regard. The other thing we're going to do with this network and with our resource repository is we have the ability to serve as what I call a reference librarian role, which is if you can't find something or if you're looking for data, we will help get people pointed in the right direction or to the right repository of data that can be useful to them. So that's another way in which I think technology can connect much of what's been talked about here.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'll move now to Mexico again. And you laid the ground for what UNICEF does with youth support, social cohesion, and I'd like to move a little bit to conflict sensitivity and systems innovation. So, what are the most promising entry points for integrating mental health and social psychological support, youth leadership, and environmental education into climate response and recovery programs from your experience?
Thank you very much, Angie. I mean, because of the scope of the work we do at UNICEF, schools and community platforms obviously offer powerful entry points. UNICEF is embedding mental health and social support and climate literacy and youth engagement into education in emergencies, for instance, or child protection and recovery programs. So we are seeing great impact when youth are not only recipients of the services, but also co-designing of local climate solutions. So we have a youth peace and security related pilot project. We have interagency young women peace builders program. We specifically reach out to the youth who are often not associated with the UN or a big NGO, but local leaders. So we are trying to get rid of the criteria that hinders, for example, the youth on the move for the opportunities, and try to build a capacity that is locally appropriate and also engaging. So this will be more sustainable, and then also to combine with the intergenerational dialogue and can foster both resilience and agency, not only young people but community at large. And this could be also a healing process for the challenges caused by climate shocks and conflict. So I would like to share one example, which is it's called the Youth on the Move UNV program, which is having asylum seekers or internally displaced youth or migrants in a professional assignment with the UNICEF, and then these programs provide a young individual with opportunity to develop their work skills and career goals and establish valuable connection and making them integral to UNICEF effort in climate action and other areas. And this was follow up to ongoing the fellowship for the youth on the move, and we are trying to bring different communities and different youth from different backgrounds to be able to take the center stage to share their own stories, but their involvement not to be tokenistic but meaningful, and also provide opportunities for long term. So this is one of the things that we're trying to do, and we sent last COP we were able to finally have a first child advocate to speak in a high level event, and it was a milestone, as they were never considered as a key partner in the climate security and environmental peace building space. And I will talk a bit more about the initiative we are launching as a continuation from COP28, which is called the Global Framework on Children, Youth and Climate Peace and Climate Security, to which we are trying to bring it down to the youth and children, based on the high-level decisions which we've been discussing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Hans. What safeguards are built into the Climate Investment Fund to ensure that investments in high-emission countries also contribute to peace building and social equity in affected communities? And in a more general sense, what is the connection between high finance and the climate security nexus as you see it?
Thank you. I think our common challenge is actually how to make climate action conflict sensitive and conflict action climate sensitive. So I'd like to underscoring the point that we need to work together and come together from different professions in order to address this issue and how to take it forward. On the issue of safeguards, of course, we are all working, or most of the climate finance is being delivered through multilateral setting or multilateral entities, be it the multilateral development banks, the World Bank and the African Development Bank and the likes, and the UN system. And of course, all these institutions have all kinds of safeguards in place to ensure that we are not causing undue harm and that money is being spent the way it should be spent. When it comes to the Climate Investment Fund, and Diego, I assume that you mean the Climate Investment Fund hosted by the MDBs, the joint program by the MDBs, and the 8 MDBs that are implementing the Climate Investment Fund activities. And of course, all these MDBs have the safeguards, and the safeguards apply across the board. If they're co-financing, it's the most stringent safeguards that will prevail in a system like that. So for me, and they even have then their separate strategies for fertility, conflict, and violence. And then there's a mandate to undertake conflict sensitivity analysis. If you look at the vertical climate and environment funds, in contrast, I'm also the board member on the GCF, the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund also have most of the safeguards in place. I would say basically all relevant ones, the same with the Global Environment Facility and the Adaptation Fund. But we don't have conflict sensitivity analysis on our books as of today. Why? This has been discussed in the board, and the board has actually rejected moving forward with a conflict sensitivity analysis. And I think the underriding question for many board members, especially from the developing countryside, is the question, will additional analysis improve access to resources, or will it make it more difficult to get access to resources? So that is the challenge we are faced with, that some, I would say also from my own side, if you have to do all kinds of analysis, it's going to be more difficult to get access to resources. It will require more resources to prepare projects. On the flip side, though, maybe you will get better projects and better outcome if you do it. But that's the trade-off we have to make. And again, the point I made initially also, this is a multilateral setting. and we have to come together in order to agree to what kind of safeguards we should all adhere to in settings like this. But for me, overall, I think we need to do a little bit more work on the vertical climate and environment funds in order to move this forward. And of course, that will also have an influence on our discussions with the larger provider of other finance to developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Now back to you, Julius. And you talked about what you do in terms of scaling up climate action and through finance in fragile and conflict-affected countries and the shift that has been happening with projects in Iraq and Somalia. And you also talked about some of the challenges, the institutional challenges that you face in the work that you do. So let me ask you, given that context, what governance mechanisms and financing strategies are critical to ensure that climate adaptation in agriculture reduces conflict risks and build long-term community resilience?
Well, a very timely question coming off the back of Hans's comments, because fundamentally, do we need to be focusing on bringing together climate and conflict sensitive thinking more closely. And effective climate action in agri-food systems needs to really begin with a very strong understanding of the local contextual dynamics. So that kind of an integrated approach, which is looking at what the conflict dynamics may be, what the climate change dynamics are, but also the food security dynamics. And we recently did a study in the Karamoja cluster with IGAD and Interpeace, which looked precisely at food security, mobility, climate change, and conflict. So bringing together a more holistic understanding. And those kind of more holistic context conflict analyses at the baseline ensures that policies and programs are designed in a more conflict sensitive manner. So we need to be, and that's not where there's just a live conflict. I mean, this is being aware of where there may be latent or existing tensions, which haven't yet emerged into some kind of conflict as many people would imagine. And that can be competition over scarce natural resources, land, water, etc. And we want to make sure that we don't inadvertently exacerbate them. So this is at the core of what one needs to be trying to do. At a minimum, doing no harm, and always trying to do more good. So conflict sensitive programming, which helps us then also understand how we can work towards promoting social cohesion and more inclusive contributions to local peace. We also need to make sure that, and this is a perennial call, that programming needs to be flexible and responsive to changing contexts. In protracted crises, things change. We need to have a contextual baseline, which we feed into an ongoing contextual monitoring process so that we can understand where we may need to adapt, shift particular activities so that they are actually up to date and being more real time. And we talked about data earlier, which is near real time in many cases. That can help us do that. And we need to have robust enough monitoring, evaluation frameworks in place so that they are right the way through the program cycle and allow us to do timely course corrections, and so that we remain effective and conflict sensitive. And that's a continuous feedback loop, which we don't do necessarily, I would say globally, often enough. And it was really interesting to hear Hans's comments there. Another point I think is, and I just highlighted with the example from the Karamoja cluster, is around collaboration and how we leverage the complementarity of expertise, of mandates and approaches across the climate, development, humanitarian, DRR, peace actor sectors we call it different things, but currently called the humanitarian development peace nexus approach. There is a lot of value in that. And some things there are really very simple. Sharing analyses, undertaking joint analyses. There are some basic things that we don't do enough. And I think we need to consistently call for that to happen. And there is a lot of work going on around climate, peace, and security, which is very maybe individually agency specific and maybe doesn't come together often enough. So collaborative example, for example, is one that we've been working with UNEP, building off Google Earth, is a platform called Strata, which was launched last week formally, and that allows visualization using different layers, which can help inform more qualitative analyses. And I would also say, you know, the multi-donor trust funds, which are out there, where you can work with other NGOs, with other UN agencies, funds and programs, bringing together different expertise. And that kind of collaboration is even more critical in a time of shrinking funding and where we need to be maximizing impact and efficiency. Another point very quickly, I think, is about these regional approaches. Multi-year flexible funding, as always, but really critical in fragile conflict-affected contexts. And finally, and certainly not last, local community organizations. Vital role in implementing climate and conflict-sensitive agri-food system programming, especially when it comes to activities aiming to foster social cohesion and build local peace. That deep contextual knowledge and presence on the ground make them the best position actors to implement those kind of activities. I'll stop there and hopefully you managed to catch the last of what I said.
Thank you, Jules. Well, I'll move back to Jeff now with a question on data. And Jeff, given what you said before on the work that you're doing, the better evidence, what you aim to achieve, what are the key barriers to using data effectively in peace building, particularly when it comes to like high-risk settings? And how can they be addressed to ensure ethical and conflict-sensitive use of data?
Thank you. I guess the biggest barriers are a combination of ethical issues, technical issues, and an issue that I'm not sure I know how to describe, but I guess I would say credibility issues. And what I mean by that is the attacks on data and evidence in and of itself. The ethical issues relate to the need to ensure privacy, security, access, and to make sure that the provision of data or the connection between people does not provide a means for increased surveillance. Confidentiality has to be paramount. So how do we secure the ability of people to share information, including at the community level? And part of that relates to my next point, which is data itself can and has become politicized in many ways, so that there is assaults that are happening against the notion of evidence. There are those who are using technology and communications as a way to undermine or attack science, what we would consider evidence. And in some ways, we are sort of in an era of contested truths, and whose truth prevails, and how can science and data regain the trust of broader swaths of the population, so that people have confidence in data and science. So I think there's a messaging, there's a communications, and there are political aspects to this that make this much more complex. The other thing is, and data is also being used, or I shouldn't say data, but technology is being used to manipulate data, from deep fakes to false use of statistics, or making up data to serve a political or economic end. And so that has to be addressed. And what I understand from technology people, because I am not a technology expert, is the potential for blockchain technology as a way to create a more secure way of verifying and then securing data. So there is a considerable amount of work that is going into that element. I mean, blockchain data really began in the business field, and it originally was applied in supply chain aspects of business. But there seems to be some very useful applications of that technology in the scientific field and the data management field. So that's where I think I would see sort of where some of these questions, what they are, how they've arisen, and some of what we still are working on trying to achieve, overcome, and develop. A lot of questions still with not a lot of definitive answers all the time.
Well, thank you so much for this. Let me just get back to Michiko. The UNICEF, how does UNICEF ensure that child protection, early warning, and equity considerations are reflected in the design and delivery of climate relief and recovery programs, particularly under the COP28 declaration and other frameworks related to climate security?
Thank you very much, Diego. So I would like to give another context since it's just often the youth and children are neglected in this conversation. So within the context of protracted crisis, it is obvious that children who bear the brunt. But in 2022, for example, more than 468 million children worldwide, that is more than 1 in 6 children were living in a conflict zone. The highest number in the last 2 decades, the majority of those also are affected by disasters. And then I give you a bit more segmented information as well, that when zooming information, that when compared to children in development context, children in conflict settings are more than twice as likely to be undernourished and without clean water, twice as likely to die before age 5, and more than 3 times as likely to not to go to school. And globally, 1 in 2 children suffer some form of violence each year, and violent death in non-conflict setting vastly outnumber deaths from conflict. So there's a lot of things need to be addressed, and yet the children's needs remain underrepresented in global climate policy and finance, as we all know. And for example, less than half of nationally determined contributions NDC are child or youth specific, and only 2.4% of climate finance from multilateral climate funds serving the UNFCCC over the 17 years to 2023 supports projects targeting children, including fragile and conflict affected countries. UNICEF is doing its best to address these issues and also find a solution for this. So through the COP28 declaration, UNICEF and partners committed to putting children's needs at the heart of climate response. And we're doing this by embedding equity and protection principles into climate financing as adaptation plans and responsive strategically. But it has been challenging. For example, we ensure the post-disaster assessments capture the unique vulnerability of girls and boys, and that our early warning system are child inclusive, and that a protection service are maintained and adapted in emergency. And we also advocate for child responsive budgeting, support government to use climate finance in ways that reduce inequality and strengthen the resilience for the most marginalized children. One of the initiatives that UNICEF is currently working on, the UNICEF Today and Tomorrow initiative, TTI, In 8 targeted countries, Bangladesh, Haiti, Madagascar, Mozambique, Solomon Islands are included, and initiatives focus on reducing a number of children directly impacted by disaster and building resilience in children, households, and communities. So overall, TTI has reached over 4.5 million USD in insurance payout triggered by 16 cyclone in 7 of the 8 targeted countries, supporting rapid responses and long-term recovery effort. UNICEF also invested more than 6 million USD in disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation activities across those countries. And just quickly, another example would be the Building Resilience in the Sahel program that I touched slightly before. It targets over 3 million at-risk people, including 1.9 children, across Mali, Mauritania, and Niger, which was a success. So it was an integrated resilience package from 2019 to 2023. And the program focused on 5 critical intervention levels: resilient social services, risk and conflict analysis, and prevention of shocks and stresses, like management of shock through early action, adaptation process, and within government and communities. So we work on the individual, community level, and with the government to deliver shock responsive services. That resulted achieving like 4 million people, 2.7 million children receive integrated resilience interventions. And the program has significantly reduced the needs for humanitarian intervention and and this is going to continue in 5 other countries: Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Niger. So we see this kind of programs being in very key moving forward to be able to merge the gap between the policies and the practice, local-led practice in the field. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very insightful information. And I move back again to Julius. And Julius, you talked about finance and challenges, and you talked about the humanitarian development peace nexus as an innovation that should be mobilized. And in that sense, I wanted to ask you, what role can partnerships within the humanitarian development peace nexus approach play in accelerating the action on the climate, food security linkage in fragile countries?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much. In terms of the humanitarian development peace nexus approach, and I think this was touched on already by a number of colleagues speaking, and as I mentioned it myself, I think the key thing really is that in a constrained period where we're facing a lot of different challenges, we need to bring together diverse perspectives so that we can actually have the most effective kind of interventions possible, quite apart from, at a minimum, and the P bit of the HDP nexus, at a minimum being conflict sensitive, and going back again to what Hans was saying earlier, at a minimum being conflict sensitive, but also understanding, and that means that we do no harm. It's the only way that we can really address these complex, interconnected challenges between climate change, food security, insecurity, conflict, which is what the COP28 and other declarations have been asking for. I think it allows us, I mean, certainly from an FAO perspective, allows us to learn more about ourselves, as well as benefit from the expertise and the experiences of others. We've had a strategic partnership with Interpeace since 2017, for example. That's not just helped us develop tools and guidance for programming in a conflict sensitive or contributing to peace or peace positive manner, but it's also given us an entry point to other peace actors without whom that relationship with Interpeace we may never have actually developed. It's also important, given the protracted crises context that we work in, where there may be a peacekeeping operation or a special political mission, where there are different actors at play. So, For example, we've been working with UNISFA in the Abyei administrative area. That's the interim security force for Abyei, with UNMISS in South Sudan as well, around natural resource management related projects, which link to their operations, their security related operations, but are areas in the past where we've worked on developing a joint market, bringing together different groups operating in a similar area so that there can be, we could take the contact hypothesis. But as I was saying, it allows us to benefit from others' perspectives. So in South Sudan, we're working with a community empowerment for peace organization, IOM and UN Women, which was addressing climate and food security challenges by reducing the impact of climate shocks on conflict dynamics, fostering some local inclusion between rival groups, supporting livestock health as one entry point, as well as early warning training, which further enhance food security and local level conflict resolution mechanisms. So this contributes to elements of peace and stability at a local level. And strong partnerships are really the backbone of HDP Nexus implementation. And it's not to say that this is a panacea, it's not. And is it easy? No, it isn't. I think over the last 4 or 5 years, we have seen numerous different processes and attempts to say, what is a good HDP Nexus practice? How can I implement this in this area? These things are inherently contextual, but we do also have a good set of guidance. We, as FAO, adhered to the OECD DAC recommendation on the HDP Nexus towards the end of last year. There are some core tenets and principles there. And these assist us with not just accelerating action around these areas of linkages through joint analysis, through joint programming, by advocating for more joint and joined up financing. But they also help us, I think, benefit from exchanges both at an academic level as well as at a policy level and a programmatic level. I'll stop there. And apologies, my connection has been less than stable from Rome.
Don't worry, things happen. Okay, let me have a question for Jeff. Regarding how data can be used to strengthen the integration of peace building with climate adaptation strategies and risk-informed programming, and referring to the famous filling the bookshelves of information and data. This use of data is extremely important for risk finance, the connection, or for rendering this data analytical capacity available for communities. So how can we use this data capacity to basically strengthen the integration of peace building and to facilitate a better informed risk program? Is this possible? Is this framework of data being used and connected with what the different agencies are doing? And if not, what can be done to facilitate that?
So I can't speak directly to how agencies are themselves directly using data, except in a few sort of ad hoc ways. I do know that a couple of bureaus in the State Department are doing so, as are other foreign ministries. I'm aware of the increased use and contribution of those collating data, working with the British Foreign Commonwealth Office. And the key is really, to my way of thinking, is kind of connecting data from the peace building world to data from the science world, and that policymakers need to be able to draw on both. And so the challenge for the peace building field has been to strengthen data so that we can begin to talk about it as evidence. What have we learned? What works, what doesn't work, under what circumstances, what are the consequences? And we have to do a much better job of making what we've learned accessible and meaningful to policymakers. So that's part of what we're trying to do at the Carter School. It's something that other organizations are trying to do. I mentioned ACLED before, but there's also the Alliance for Peace Building, their IRENE database, which is a database of effectively assessments, evaluations, and reports of peace building projects that are searchable and gathered in a single database. So the importance is really to make it's not so much to integrate them, but to make them complementary between science, what we're learning about climate issues, what we're learning about desertification, what we're learning about what's happening on the ground in a place like West Africa or the Sahel, but then being able to bring in a peace building lens, a conflict sensitivity lens, in which we're understanding the dislocating effects and some of the more deep rooted causes of conflict dynamics, and how what we're learning about climate and the science on the ground, how that's having an impact on the conflict dynamics. So it's that connection that becomes particularly important.
Thank you, Jeff. And with the timing of our session close to an end, we'd like to move forward to the last round of questions, moving forward, actually, what we would like to see in the future in terms of this very insightful and very intense and enriching discussion. And now, Julius, let me ask you, given all the challenges and opportunities we discussed in this session in terms of food security, the climate and peace nexus, and fragile and conflict-affected countries, in your opinion, what should be prioritized at COP30?
Okay, I'll turn my video off again, so hopefully we'll have a stable connection. Unsurprisingly, I am going to say, building off COP27, 28, 29, that COP30 should continue to give priority to agri-food systems. And that includes all the activities along food system nodes, so food production to food handling, storage, processing, packaging, distribution, market, consumption, etc. Transformation of agri-food systems is one of the main solutions to tackle the climate crisis, but also the interconnected biodiversity, land degradation crisis, which together with conflicts is driving increasing levels of acute food insecurity. And as I said, the new global report on food crises will be coming out next month, and we can see and there will be an upward spike of those 282 million people in IPC phase 3+. There are about 4 billion people have food-related livelihoods, and which are especially sensitive to climate change, particularly in least developing countries and SIDS. About 70 to 80% of the population in protracted crises depend on agriculture and food-based livelihoods for their job, income, and food security. So COP30 should really, I think, boost the priority to invest in and implement conflict-sensitive climate action on climate change adaptation and resilience in agri-food systems by all actors. This would be the main thing that I would want to see coming through in COP30, building off what's happened previously. And it needs to be relevant to all actors, state and non-party stakeholders, so regions, businesses, investors, civil society, including youth, indigenous peoples, and local communities. And as I said earlier, we've got less than 2% of climate finance reaches small-scale agriculture, despite its importance for what I've just said. So there is a huge gap there that needs to be addressed and still needs to be addressed. And that needs to come through how the vertical funds and other financing is represented, and how such investments in inclusive, climate-adapted, resilient agri-food systems, which are being led by small-scale actors on the front line of climate change, and the benefits that accrue from that. So the first one, reducing climate risks and impacts, so reducing loss and damage from extreme events such as drought, flood, and storm. Securing more resilient livelihoods and healthy natural ecosystems, which helps feed into reducing local tensions and conflict over natural resources. Increasing food security at a local level, reducing forced displacement and involuntary migration, and contributing to stability and peace building processes. So I think this is a kind of like a 5, if at least not maybe even more, win solution to tackle climate, biodiversity, land degradation, food insecurity, and conflict. So yeah, for me, that would be a key for COP30 to take forward, and to built within that to really emphasize the importance of the linkages between climate change and conflict dynamics. We see it on the ground every day as FAO. The reality is that this is what smallholder farmers, agriculturalists across, be it livestock, be it fisher folk, are facing. Those are the realities, and they are trying to adapt their livelihoods accordingly, and need the support to be able to do so in a sustainable manner, which ensures food security going forward and reduces tensions and conflicts.
Thank you, Julius, so much. And moving to Mexico. So looking at COP30, we also had a lot of questions from the audience on UNICEF and youth. So moving to COP30, what commitments or structural shifts are needed to ensure that children's rights and intergeneration equity are not only protected, but that youth are meaningfully engaged in shaping the climate agenda?
Thank you very much. So we need a shift from symbolic participation to structural and meaningful engagement. That means creating permanent mechanisms for children youth to shape climate peace building policies. So it cannot be, working in silos. So from national adaptation plans to peace dialogue, at COP30, UNICEF is pushing for commitments that go beyond protection, investments in youth-led climate solutions, resourcing local youth networks, which it's always been challenging. With the layer of bureaucracies that we have in the system, and then accessibility is often an issue, but ensuring the meaningful participation of children in climate finance, governance, and peace building process would be a game changer. We are also calling for climate commitment to be age and gender responsive, with clear merits on how they reduce risks and expand opportunities for children and youth. And I have given a couple examples on already. And one of the tools that we are using to reach diverse youth to be able to take part in it is a youth report. Is a free SMS-based tool developed by UNICEF for community participation, and it's available via numerous messaging, social media, SMS channels, and even work on the basic mobile phones. So UNICEF, for example, in 2023, since 2024, figures has not been reported yet. UNICEF supported millions of children through various climate-related initiatives, but your report was a key to be able to do that. Specifically, we engaged 27.9 million children, adolescents, and youth in advocacy, 1.4 million in communication, and 36.6 million in online platform. So how are we going to bring these voices to COP30? We call Lead on Children, Youth and Peace and Climate Security Global Framework Initiatives. Just to give you a brief background, this initiative aims to establish a unified approach to child and youth responsive action within the climate and peace agenda. This is a new initiative that launched in COP28, and UNICEF as a founding member and co-lead of this initiative, along with UNGO, Global Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security, COP presidencies, UNFPA and other UN agencies, member states, CSO partners. And then this is a momentum that we're creating, and more partners are coming on board as we speak, and this effort builds a momentum from, like I said, COP28, but it's continued through UNGA, Summit of Future, and we really hope that finalizing framework set to launch at COP30 and operationalizing it thereafter. And this would be the first time that we're trying to integrate the voices and needs of children and youth into climate policies, actions related to climate security and environmental peace building. It emphasized the importance of inclusive policies and intergenerational leadership to ensure the young voices are heard and also their voices are put into practice. So this is a small step, but it's been quite a process, and we're bringing a lot of different communities together. And we hope that the unique challenges faced by children and young people are continue to be more and more central to global climate strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Michiko. Now, one question for Hans, both as a scientist but also as a diplomat, and looking towards the future. I mean, we also see in a very challenging geopolitical context, so obviously we cannot put anybody on the spot on this, but I wanted to ask you, and looking at what the ways COP29 has built upon or diverged from earlier global efforts, such as the COP28 declaration and how things are moving in this file, integrating climate, peace, and development, and looking at the challenges that have been emerging, what needs to be done to sustain momentum and to make sure this agenda moves forward in light of what's happening, in light of the need, in light of the urgency? And so how can COP30 play a role in advancing this integration, particularly in shaping donor states and financial institutions and their approach to peace-sensitive investments? Basically, what's your wish list on this one?
Thank you very much, Diego. First, let me just say that I think maybe we have too high expectations for the COPs. Please remember what a climate COP is. It is part of the UNFCCC convention and also for the Paris Agreement. So many of these issues that we have discussed here today are actually not part of the formal negotiation mandates. It took our climate negotiators 26 COPs to discuss coal, 27 COPs, and we got renewable energy acknowledged in a document. 28 COPs before fossil fuel was acknowledged. I think actually Julius can confirm it. I think actually 28 also confirmed food security, even though there probably have been some references to it before. But it's still, we cannot put all these issues into a COP, the formal negotiation structure. And climate, peace, and security should, in my view, definitely not be a negotiation issue, because then they have more than enough to struggle with. If not, they should address the security issue. And I think I've said it before in some of my interventions that based on current geopolitics and the changing position of various governments, there's no way we can get an agreement in a formal negotiation setting on climate, peace, and security agenda, because it's too decisive. So this belongs, and it is actually part of the action agenda. And I think this is where we also can make some progress. But then we need to rally those of us that are the willing to form the necessary coalitions and take actions and basically leave the laggards behind. Some of the laggards will come back to us in a few years' time, most likely, because we've seen this already happening. So for me, then the key questions, and also if you build on what Brazil has outlined as some of their priorities, going back to this topic that we are discussing, I think at COP28, UAE focused on the political will to get the recognitions of the link between climate and security without using the word security, because they all shied away from that word. And at COP29 in Baku, it was a stronger focus on implementation. And I think that was a good move in the sense. At the same time, so far, no one has mentioned the COP truce appeal. That was also quite difficult for many of us when they actually wanted all parties in a conflict to observe a truce during the COP, and about 130 countries signed up to it. But none of the countries that are strong supporters of the climate, peace, and security agenda. So for many of us, this was actually a little bit complicating factors. In terms of COP30, Brazil has made it quite clear, and there's no single outcome that will determine success at COP30. In Dubai, it was the global stocktake. Last year, it was the NCQG, as I call it, the finance target. So there's not a single outcome that will determine this success. It's more that fine-tuning negotiations mandate. And Anna Tony, the CEO of COP30, she mentioned in a call that I listened into that there are 18 mandates, negotiation mandates they will focus on. But overall, Brazil also intends to move from negotiations to implementation and action. And I think for me, that is a really good message coming from the presidency. And now we need to look at all the declarations, we need to look at all the coalitions, and we need to rally around those that actually deliver and where there is some specific follow-up mechanisms. They also would like to bridge climate, biodiversity, and desertification agendas. That's the 3 Rio conventions. I mentioned that climate, peace, and security. Brazil has not been very supportive. Just look at what they did in terms of the Pact of the Future. They don't recognize climate change as a security risk. When we were sitting in the council together with Brazil, we did not see any change in policy from Bolsonaro to Lula. So in that sense, I don't think this will be a prominent part of the presidency's action agenda or the presidency's program, meaning that it will be up to the rest of us to organize as part of the action agenda, as part of all the activities that are happening in various parts of the COP, and I think that should be our focus going forward, and not necessarily expect that the presidency will pave the way for us. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for this. We are running over time, so I just wanted to take it to the last element here. From the questions we got from the audience, I think they have been somehow covered by our representative from UNICEF. And I think it's important to basically give a bit of a comprehensive sense of where we're heading here. This discussion has reinforced issues on effective climate action. Point made by Hans really goes notice. It's not everything has to be put on the single space of the COP30. Like the whole purpose of making it like a Christmas tree or something like that. So this has been a discussion to lay the ground, have a bit of a sense of where are we going, where are we heading. And we invite all of you, whether you are researchers, policymakers, practitioners, or students, to carry these insights in your own work. The action and the engagement needs to be horizontal and multi-sectorial. The challenge before us is collective. The solutions must be as well. And so I thank you all for joining us, and I give the last word to my colleague, Angie, thanking all the speakers for your participation.
Well, thank you so much, Diego. As we conclude today's session, we want to extend our heartfelt thanks to each of our panelists for sharing their insights and advancing the conversation on how we move from climate peace commitments to meaningful, grounded action. We also thank our audience for their presence and engagement. Thank you all for joining us today. And we hope we carry the commitments not only to raising ambition, but to following through with action rooted in justice, as my colleague Diego just mentioned, local knowledge and peace. Thank you so much.